Today I'm going to be talking about Node-RED, briefly what it is, how to install it into Home Assistant as an add-on, and then we'll walk through some basic flows. I can show you what automations to set up easily and what automations you can set up even without Home Assistant. There's some things that you can do that are really cool. So you can use Node-RED without Home Assistant at all, but today I'm going to show you how to run it in Home Assistant because I already have Home Assistant and it's easier, and also we're going to show you how it links up with Home Assistant so that any entity state changes can be received in Node-RED and vice versa. So here is Home Assistant. We are going to go to Settings, go to Add-ons, and then this shows the add-ons that are currently installed. If you go to add-on store here, then it shows you a lot more options. I'm going to search up here for Node-RED, click here, and then click install. That's going to take a few minutes to install perhaps, depending on how fast your equipment is. If you install it on a Raspberry Pi, for example, it's going to be slower than if you've installed it on a virtual machine. Okay, now that is installed. So some things that you can do, some options like ticking watchdog is a good idea so that if it crashes it restarts. Auto update is personal preference really. I personally don't allow things to automatically update. And show in sidebar is very handy, so if I tick this, you'll see that it's appeared over here on the left hand side. And then we need to start the add-on. But first let's have a look at the configuration. There's various things you can configure here. You can look at the documentation for more information, but basically there's some passwords and usernames you can use so that if you're connecting to Node-RED externally, then you make sure that it's secure. I'm going to click Start here, and then we can go and have a look at the logs and see what it says. Okay, so here's the logs, and as you can see, it's complaining because you haven't set up a credential secret. So it's exited, so we need to go and set that up. So let's go back to configuration and create a secret. Once you've typed in your credential, make sure that you press save down here. So you can see here now that it's complaining about SSL certificates. So let's go back to configuration again and have a look at that. So here I've got SSL enabled, but in this instance I actually don't have SSL, so I need to uncheck this and press save. If you're using a production instance, then I highly recommend that you do have SSL and you have an SSL certificate on your Home Assistant instance. Right, here's the logs again. We can see now that it's been successful. It says starting Node-RED. If I refresh this, you can see it's installing various things. If you look at this, you can see that various things are starting, including an Nginx server. So we'll just wait a few moments and then we'll see if we can go into Node-RED. Okay, let's click over here to go into Node-RED. And you can see that it's been installed successfully. Now we're going to minimize this so that we've got a bit more space to work with, and then click through. The little intro there gives you some idea of how to use it, but let's go through it in a bit more detail. The way Node-RED breaks things down is that you have flows. You can create new flows by pressing here, for example, so we've got flow 1 and flow 2 now, and then you can isolate your different automations into different flows. What you tend to do is actually have more than one automation in a flow, because otherwise you would end up with a lot of flows. Okay, let's walk through an example. So on the left hand side here you can see your nodes. All of these nodes are nodes that relate to Home Assistant. Because you've installed the Node-RED add-on in Home Assistant, then it means that it automatically installs these nodes for you. If you've installed Node-RED separately without Home Assistant, then you probably won't see these. If you go over to the right hand side to the menu though, and then go to Manage Palette, this is where you can see the things that you can install. So you can install different palettes, which then have different nodes. So for example, here you can see that the Node-RED one by default has 49 nodes, which we'll see on the left hand side in a moment. And you can see here that you can install lots and lots of different nodes. Here's the Home Assistant palette. You can see that the Home Assistant palette uses the Home Assistant API via WebSocket. That's so that entity changes are really responsive and come through to Node-RED really quickly. If you click this, you'll be able to see all of the entities that relate to Home Assistant that Node-RED can use. The first node we're going to grab is the events state. Click and drag it onto here and then double click it. And now you can see there's quite a few options, which might be a bit intimidating at first, but it's not too bad really. So server, Home Assistant, again, it automatically sets that up for you because it knows that Node-RED is running within Home Assistant. If that's not the case, then you would need to add one yourself. Go to the configuration here, add the URL, an access token, and a couple of other details. Let's change this server back to Home Assistant, and now you can see that you can specify an entity here. So this is going to show you all of the entities from Home Assistant. For now, I'm going to select the study speaker, and you can define a state. So basically what this means is that if the state of this entity in Home Assistant changes, then it's going to trigger an event for this node. But you can also get it so that it just triggers an event when a certain state change occurs. Down here it shows you the output. So basically when a state change occurs, it will output some JSON and it will do it in this format. So you can see here that message.payload will include the state of the entity, the data. This includes a lot of stuff which we'll look at later, but things like the previous state and now the new state, and then topic as well, which is the entity ID. Down here you can also select some checkboxes which can be quite useful, so that state changes don't trigger an event under certain circumstances. So as an example, if it becomes unavailable, then you might not want it to trigger an event. So a scenario here might be that your Wi-Fi goes funny for a minute, and so the device becomes unavailable and then goes back to the previous state. You don't necessarily want to trigger an event off that. It might just be that if it changes, for example, in this instance from say playing to not playing, then you want it to trigger, or vice versa. So let's give it a name and press done. There we go. So that's the first node. Now we're going to scroll down here a little bit and look at some other nodes. I'm now going to drag this debug node onto here. Once I've dragged it, I can then click there and join them up. And then I can name this debug node. And then up here, I'm going to change this from message.payload to complete message object. So what this means is that this debug node is going to output everything that comes from this node here. So we can have a look at it and see what state information it shows. Okay. So now we've done that, we can now deploy it. So up in the top right, you can see there's deploy and there's various options. So full deploy means that all of the flows get redeployed and all of the nodes within it. Modified flows means that just the flows that you have modified get refreshed. And modified nodes means that just the nodes that you've amended get refreshed. So these can be quite useful if you've just made a few tweaks, then you just want to reload the nodes, versus if you've made lots of changes, then you want to do a full refresh to ensure that everything is working as you expect it to. So let's click this. And there we go, successfully deployed. If you've got more flows, then obviously it can take longer to deploy. It now shows running here, which basically means that it is monitoring the state of this study speaker. So in a moment, we're going to trigger a state change on this study speaker and then see what it looks like in here. So I've loaded up Home Assistant on another tab. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to Media, Text to Speech, Google, and then in here, I'm going to get it to say a message through the study speaker, which should force a state change.
Hello Mark, you can play any text on any supported media player.
Right, now that's done, let's go back to Node-RED. Okay, here we go. It shows idle as the state now here. And if we go up to this up here, which is the debug messages window, you can see here there's been quite a few messages actually. So it went from idle to buffering to playing and then back to idle. So we can expand these out and have a look in more detail. So under payload, it shows idle, that's the state. Under data, it shows the other details. So you've got the entity ID there, you've got what the previous state is and what the new state is. So let's expand out this, and then you can see not only has it got state, but it's got all sorts of dates and timestamps that you can use, which is really handy. If we go to attributes, it also shows you the class of the device and also the friendly name that you've specified in Home Assistant. So you can use all of this data further on within your flow. And under new state, that shows you what things change to. As you can see here, it's also got information about the volume. Okay, let's delve into the next message. So buffering, and then the same information. Next message, playing, data, and similar information. So now we've done our first flow end to end. You can see that whenever the study speaker changes state, it outputs here what state it has changed from and to. Now let's take a look at some of the nodes on the left hand side. I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll go through a few of the key ones. So you've got call service, and this is basically to trigger a service within Home Assistant. So if you've done automations in Home Assistant, then you'll know what call service is, and you can trigger those from Node-RED. The current state node allows you to get information about the current state of an entity in the Home Assistant. You can do this at any point in time when a flow is triggered. Device, that's when a device changes rather than an entity. I don't tend to use this one very often at the moment, but I have used it for the Nest doorbell, so that when someone rings the doorbell, that it triggers a flow in Node-RED. So events all and event state. Events all basically has all of the events that come from Home Assistant come through. So this is quite a noisy node, so you want to be careful when you're using this one. This node here is the node that we used before that you can see up here. Poll state is an interesting one. So basically what you can do is you can have a timer set up so that every 10 seconds, for example, that you poll an entity and see what the state is and then trigger something to happen. Now trigger state, this one is a bit more of an advanced version of the one we've used here basically. So I'll show you that one in a minute. Wait until is another really handy node. So basically if something happens and you want to wait until something else happens, then you use this node. So as an example, you might want to say if motion is detected, but then also wait until motion is detected in another part of the house until you actually turn a light on. Webhook is a more advanced node, but I might do a session on this at some point in the future because it's really quite powerful. The Home Assistant nodes in this section are a fairly recent addition within the last year or two. So basically what you can actually do is create new entities in Home Assistant from Node-RED. So we've already used the debug node now, and the inject node we're going to use shortly. So the inject node allows you to trigger one of these flows or a section of the flow by just pressing a button so that you can do some testing basically. So let's drag this on here. Here we go, and you can see on the left hand side there's a button here so that when you include it in a flow you can click that button and it will trigger it. Also, as well as that, if you go into it you can actually set a schedule as well so that it will automatically run at a certain interval. So for the next example, we're going to need an entity to play with. At the moment, I don't have one of those set up, so let's quickly go and do that and then come back. So in Home Assistant, we can go to Settings and then go to Devices and Services, and then this will show the integrations. So what I've got here is I've got some things on my network that have been discovered automatically. So I'm just going to go and add this Shelly bulb. We could give it an area. I'll give it an area of bedroom because it's a bedroom lamp. Finish. Okay. If we now go to Developer Tools and then we can have a look here, we can see that we've got a new light. So if I click here, we can toggle the light on and off. Let's change the name of this bulb as well. So we go up to the cog here, settings, bedroom lamp front, there we go. We can change the icon while we're here. Click update, and there we go, we've got a friendly name for it now, bedroom lamp front. So now we've done that, let's go back to Node-RED and create another flow. So now we're back in Node-RED, we can create the new example either below in the same flow, or we can do a separate flow. So let's just do it below here. So in this example, we're going to turn the lamp on by pressing a button in Node-RED. So just drag in the inject node, scroll back up, and now what we're looking for here is the node that turns something on or off, which is a call service event. So if we drag that in, now connect these up. Now we need to double click into this call service node, go to the domain, light domain, service, let's do toggle, entity, and as you can see, although we only just set this up in Home Assistant, it's already showing in Node-RED. So let's select bedroom lamp front, and then let's give this a name as well. Okay, so that's another simple flow. Let's deploy it. Now let's go back to Home Assistant, press this. You can see at the moment that the lamp is off. Let's go back to Node-RED, press this button here, and you can see that it's been successful according to Node-RED. So let's go back to Home Assistant, and you can see it's been turned on. It's gone back to the percentage that the lamp was on when we last turned it on, which is 5%. Press it again, and you can see the lamp is off. So there we go, there's the next simple flow. In preparation for the next example, we need to talk about a couple more of these nodes. So let's scroll down a bit and get to the function section. So there's a lot of nodes here that can really be quite useful when you get a little bit more advanced. So we won't go into all of them, but just a few of the key ones. So the top one, function, that's where you can write your own JavaScript functions. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, then that can be really powerful. But these ones, the switch node and the change node, you don't have to do any coding, and you can achieve a lot of the things that you can achieve with the function node. So the switch node, for example, it actually lets you choose what route to take in a flow based on an input. So for example, if something is on or if it's off, you can get it to do different things. The change node, that changes what the message says. So for example, earlier when we looked at the study speaker and we looked at the debug output, we saw that there was lots of different pieces of information. Well, with change, you can actually change some of that data or add new data to the JSON message. We'll talk about this a bit more when we go through the next example. Another one which can be handy is a delay. You don't generally want to have delays that are too long for things in case things get rebooted or crash, etc. But short delays of a few seconds or a few minutes can often be handy within these flows. Another common one that I use is time range. So you can determine whether it's a certain time of day or whether it's night time. There's lots of use cases for this one as well. So we've kind of exhausted the test rig now. So let's hop over to my production instance of Node-RED and go through some more examples. So here is a fairly simple example again, but a better use case of something that I actually use. So I have some reminders that send me a notification to my phone every month or two. So I've got one for car maintenance and one for checking the batteries of things and one for checking the Hoover, so to make sure it's maintained correctly. You may argue that I should maintain the car more than every 2 months, but it is what it is. So if I click into here, you'll see that this is called Big Timer. So this is actually a node from a separate palette, so you would need to add this one separately. You won't find this in Node-RED by default, but ultimately if we go back into it, you can see that you can set different times for things to turn on and off, but you can also do it based on month, year, day. There's all sorts of exclusions, so this could be a video in itself really. But apart from that, if you look in here, build notification, you can see that what we're doing here is we're using a change node to set some information in the message. So firstly, we're setting the message.payload to be empty, so an empty JSON message. And then we're setting message.payload.data to some useful information. Now you'll see why we do that in a minute. So here you can see that I've set a title of what I want the notification to have, the message itself, which is what our tires need to be set to, and then some additional things around how you want the notification to vibrate. Cancel that, and then if we go to here, this one is fairly straightforward then. So you've got the notify domain, because I've already set up that integration so that you can send notifications to my phone, and then you've got the service of mobile app mark phone, and that name will obviously depend also on how you've set up that device in Home Assistant. So if you look down here, you can see that these are the properties that you need to pass in, and these correspond with what was added in the previous section here. There's actually a couple of things that are not relevant anymore. So for example, target that I've got here used to be used, but now because I've actually got the entity pointing to my phone specifically, you don't need that. If you look below, there's some more similar examples. So this one is a reminder to check the water pressure. So over time, the water pressure can drop in your system and you should top it up really if you've got a combi boiler or if you've got a separate boiler and tank. So that's what I do, and what I do here is I have it a bit more useful, whereby it actually detects when you're within the area of where the tank is. So here, every 2 weeks, it runs at 8 PM on a Sunday, and what it does is it sends me a notification to my phone, but what it also does is detect whether the motion sensor has been triggered or not in the bedroom. So what happens here is that when it gets to 8 PM on Sunday, this will run. It will then get to this node here, which is a wait until node, and then it will basically wait until the state of this PIR is set to on. So basically for when I enter the bedroom, and it will wait for 20 hours until it times out. It probably should be less than that really. And then it will send a message to the Google that's in that room. If you look below here, you can see that there's an exercise reminder one. Unfortunately, I'm not really strict with these anymore. So you can see here that this is disconnected. So basically this actually isn't running at the moment. So this node will run still, but it's not connected to anything, so nothing will happen. So far, all of the examples have involved Home Assistant to some degree, but you don't have to use Home Assistant. It makes things a lot easier, especially if you've got a lot of things that are automated already. But if you look here, you can see that there are some things that you can do without Home Assistant. So here I've got Xiaomi gateways, and these are configured directly in here. So I've added a palette for Xiaomi gateways, and they connect directly to the gateways. So then the gateways have got sensors attached to them, so PIRs, contact sensors and buttons. And then here what happens is, whenever any activity is detected or a button is pressed, this node will fire and then it will send a message. What I've done here is I've used one of these link out nodes, and then you can link it to another flow. So basically I've got the gateways on each floor and in the garage. And then if we have a look at garage, for example, you can see that then when something happens from a Xiaomi gateway, it checks to see if that is from the garage button or from the workbench button. It then checks to see, well, what click type was it? Was it a single click? Was it a double click or a long press? and then you get it to do different things. In this instance, when you press the button, I have got it to trigger an entity in Home Assistant. However, you don't need to do that. A lot of these lights and plugs that I have are MQTT based, and so you can set up a separate MQTT server which doesn't involve Home Assistant if you wish, and then you could call that through here. You might be wondering what this node is here. Well, this is a bit of a hangover from old versions of Node-RED really, where sometimes you'd get a failure on the call service if you had a long string of nodes before it with certain pieces of data in it. So I probably need to do some housekeeping here. So if we look below this, you can see that there's something that happens when garden lights are triggered. So in this instance, when the garden lights are turned on, it automatically turns them off again after an hour. So you can see that here after an hour it will start a timer running, and then after the 1 hour it will turn the garden lights off again. So if we go into here, you can see it calls the service of turn off. If we scroll a bit further down, then you can see that the garage lights turn on automatically when I go into the garage. I've got a PIR at either end of the garage, and then it checks to see is it motion that was detected, because these PIRs can detect motion but also light sensitivity. So yeah, if there's motion, then it says check if the light's already on, which you don't really need to do, and then if it isn't on, then turn the garage light on. So hopefully you can see from these few examples that we've done in Node-RED that it's very powerful. We've only just scratched the surface really. If you'd like to see more videos on Node-RED, please comment down below and let me know what you'd like them to be about. Well, that's it for today, so thanks until next time.